Part 1. Into the Forest. Chapter 4. Dark Magic. Before Catri could respond, the pot of porridge tipped over on the table behind us. We both jumped and spun around. Her reactions were slow. She reached for it. My reactions were faster. I grabbed the hot pot with my glove and managed to right it before more than a dribble of porridge spilled out. Ree? I waggled my finger at the tiny house fae standing next to it. Gabriele Antonio D'Amico, or Ree as we called him, stood on the table with a spoon that was nearly as tall as he was, scooping up the porridge greedily. What? Am I not part of this family? Do you expect me to go hungry? I need food to keep up my impressive strength. He flexed a muscle. Always trying to impress. It's breakfast time, isn't it? This body doesn't run on empty. He winked impishly. He was such a comical little flirt. You could have asked for a serving like a normal person, I said. Ree puffed out his chest. I'm no normal person, as you say. I'm a Municelli of the highest order. A prince among his people. Catri spoke to me in an aside, past her cupped hand. Is Ree here? I nodded. It was a puzzle to both of us, but she had never been able to see him. Whereas I always had from earliest memory. She used to accuse me of having an imaginary friend, but eventually came to believe that Ree was real. Now she had to rely on my eyes and accounts of him. And up to his antics, I replied out of the side of my mouth. I somehow managed to resist rolling my eyes, but it was hard to keep a straight face. We'd heard this speech too many times before. Me firsthand, and Catri and Mai relating it to her. He's giving the speech, I whispered to her. I couldn't help interrupting his diatribe. I thought house fae were supposed to be heard at most but never seen. I shouldn't have teased Ree, knowing I would rile him up. That's only for amateurs. Those of low birth. He took a slurp of porridge. If more of us showed ourselves, more of your kind would believe we were real, not just myths, and treat us with more respect. We could get more credit, rather than be blamed for minor mishaps that are beneath our dignity. Then why don't you show yourself to Catri? It seemed like a reasonable question to me. Ree shrugged. We've been over this before. She could see me if she truly believed and wanted to. I'm not hiding. I let out a sigh. Of course Catri believed. But I wasn't going to argue the point with Ree again. You get too much credit as it is, I said dryly. People ascribe credit to you for every setback, small and large, when most of them are simply accidents. In my opinion, your reputation for mischief is greatly enhanced by your fellow fae remaining in the shadows. I pulled out a chair at the table across from him and collapsed into it. For my entire life, at least the part that I could remember, we had been cursed, or honored depending on how you looked at it, with a house fae from the south instead of a native-friendly northern one. The cultural differences between the two were extreme. Northern house fae, brownies, could be mischievous and surly. Sure. But they were generally helpful. A family could count on them, often in surprising ways in times of real emergencies. I myself knew at least half a dozen families that swore their house fae had rendered them invaluable services. In one case, even going out in a blizzard and bringing back the midwife to save a mother in labor and her baby. The master of the house was so grateful, he gave the brownie a valuable coat. Southern house fae typically lived in the warm, sunny regions in and around the royal circle. By reputation, they were notorious pranksters and hoarders of pots of gold. They delighted in annoying the households they occupied, and were highly unreliable, rarely, if ever, helping in times of need. Given how privileged and wealthy the South was, particularly the royal circle, Northerners generally approved of the average Southern house fae's behavior. The nobles and royals deserved some adversity, even if it was minor compared to our struggles. Such was our misfit life that Ree had adopted us, following us wherever we moved. He never explained why he, apparently a house fae of noble birth, had chosen to leave his native lands. Instead, he complained about our climate, food, and culture. We were left to assume he was a misfit of some kind too, and had been banished to the north, to our province of the misfit and malformed. Whatever the case, we were unable to shake him. Mother had given up long ago. He was off on another tear, spouting his speech between slurps of porridge. I sat silently, shaking with my hand over my mouth, trying to hold my laughter in. Catri focused her gaze where I did, politely silent although she couldn't see or hear him. I finally interrupted him again. How is it that you can sneak up on us like that? Years of training and experience. I'm older than I look. He ran his hand through his hair and preened exaggeratedly. I could never tell whether he was serious when he did this, or just trying to get a laugh out of me. I had no idea how old Ree really was, but he certainly looked young, no older than me. I would say no older than Catri and me, but of course, Catri looked decades and decades older than she actually was. Ree was dark-haired and dark-eyed. He could change size, but generally he was no more than a foot tall, a height he was immensely proud of. According to him, he was tall and studly for his kind, and extremely handsome, again in his opinion. I would grudgingly admit that for his size, he was cute. Maybe if he were 5 feet taller. Ree fancied himself a ladies' man, and maybe he was among his own kind. He was always immaculately tailored and groomed, his hair always neatly trimmed. He loved bright colors, and dressed accordingly, which was kind of odd for a creature who generally was supposed to remain invisible. But Ree could sometimes be useful, if you played to his vanity properly, and he was in the right mood. I needed his help now. There was no time to waste. The rose was dying on the table before our eyes. I'd have to try harder not to offend him. It was almost as if he read my mind. He spied the rose and cried out, dropping his spoon with a clatter and coming around the pot of porridge to study it. He made the same 2-fingered circle around himself that Morel had, and muttered some kind of incantation beneath his breath. For an instant I swore he paled. I'd never seen him rattled or frightened before. He seldom lost his confident air. He put his hands on his hips and looked at me with total shocked disbelief. You went into the forest. He shuddered. When I cautioned you, specifically not to. I warned you of the dangers. He shook his head and muttered almost to himself, how did you get past my defenses? This was interesting. Ree did care. What defenses? I cocked my head, eager to hear him brag about either the traps he'd set or the powers he had, powers I didn't already know about. Ready to catalog them, in case I ever needed to get around either of them in the future. You were sleeping like a baby on the hearth when I left. I walked right past you. What? He physically jumped. This is bad. Worse than I thought. He shook his head, still so serious that he didn't seem like himself. He was clearly afraid. You're lucky, Maisie. Very lucky to escape the Doove. The queen of the Unseelie court doesn't allow trespassers in her forest. If you were so determined to go, you should have taken me with you. I couldn't tell him in front of Catri that there was no need for the feared Dorka to bother with me. The queen had other, much more handsome prey in her sights. His face swam before me. I swallowed a stab of guilt and worry. What had happened to him? Was he even still alive? Was he being tortured, even as I spoke with Ree? I shook the vision of his face from my mind and concentrated on Ree. How could I? You told me not to. You would have tried to stop me. Ree scowled. Is that the rose? Ree lurked everywhere. I had never directly told him my plan, but somehow he knew anyway, and had apparently tried to stop me. He must have overheard me discussing it with Catri. Yes, I said. It is the rose. He turned up his nose. It's less impressive than lore would have one think. Not so magical as I imagined. He walked around it, studying it critically. What are you waiting for? Why haven't you taken it to Morel? He wasn't, apparently, as in the know as I imagined. Then again, he'd been caught napping. I tried, but she doesn't want it. Despair washed over me, as unexpected and powerful as fresh grief. Ree stepped closer and examined the flower closely, inhaling deeply, then peering into the bowl where I'd stored the petals. And no wonder. It's in terrible shape. It's not even sparking. Only weak vibes are coming off it. Like all things that are cut, it's dying. Soon it will have no magic left at all. What is he saying? Catri asked. Ree says the rose is dying, I replied. Catri let out a gasp of horror. Of course it is. I wasn't thinking. I should have put it in water right away. Her movements were slow and painful to watch, but I knew her well enough to realize that this was her attempt at quick action. Yes. I pushed my own chair back and sprung to my feet. I'm too tired to think clearly too. Stay. I'll get it. It won't help. I turned to Ree, surprised by his sympathetic tone. Why not? I asked. You don't have the kind of magical water you need. Even if you did, even magic water can't bring something back from the dead. It could have prolonged the magic a while longer, but we're beyond that now. He touched the rose gently, surprisingly sympathetic and reverent toward it. It's no surprise Morel didn't want it. It takes potent magic to make a beauty potion with any lasting power at all. If the magic is weak, the potion wears off too quickly. To make permanent beauty, beauty of the kind that attracts a king, requires strong magic indeed. At least that explained Morel's anger and disappointment. To some degree. Without thinking, I glanced at my hand. How long would it stay beautiful? Ree saw my action and followed my gaze to my beautiful hand. He bounded over and took a closer look. Too perfect. You've already used it. But I thought it was for Catri. Is that how the rose got in this terrible shape? I didn't use it. Not on purpose. The rose is for Catri. I'm not sure how my hand got this way. Maybe because I carried the rose with it. I let out a heavy sigh. That's why we need your help, Riri. I'd called him Riri when I was small. I hadn't called him the pet name in years. Somehow it had slipped out. I don't understand how this magic works. What can we do? Is there anything we can do with the remains of the rose to help Catri? Ree walked back to the rose and circled around it several times, stopping once to peek into the bowl of petals again and stare at them intently. Who did this? This wasn't an accident. This rose was purposefully crushed. I looked at Catri and shook my head. I had never heard Ree sound or look so serious. I swallowed hard, not wanting to scare Catri with the details of what happened in the Doove, or how near I'd come to dying at the hands of the Fear Dorka. She was sensitive by nature, and easily frightened and made anxious by even simple things. The aging sickness and its recent rapid progression had made her anxiety worse. I had to shield her. Ree crooked his finger at me, drawing me close. Who? I glanced at Catri and back to Ree. I couldn't say the Fear Dorka's name in front of her. A darkling. He appeared just after I cut the rose. I didn't even hear him coming. He slapped the rose out of my hand and crushed it beneath his heel before I could stop him. Catri gasped, the little bit of color drained out of her already pale face. You faced a darkling? I reached over and covered her bony hand with mine. It's okay. It's over. I'm fine. But Ree wasn't satisfied. How did you escape this darkling? My dagger. I pointed to where it lay on the table. I lunged for him with my dagger. I barely nicked him. But it was enough. He flew off in a panic, clutching the tiny cut as if I had slashed his throat wide open. Ree hopped on the pink quartz hilt of the dagger, licked his finger and touched it to the blade. Then he put his finger in his mouth and sucked. Iron. You poisoned him, Sorella. What? Iron is poison to darklings. To fae in general, even me. But to a much lesser degree. Smart of you to bring this dagger for protection. Where did you get it? Ree sounded suspicious. He hopped off the hilt and walked back to the rose. It was in Mother's things, I said, feeling the loss of her powerfully. I only took it because Morel told me I needed a sharp knife to cut the rose. It's the sharpest thing we have. It was also probably one of the most valuable things we owned. Mother had prized it and kept it locked away from us. For our safety, she told us. It was so pretty, like nothing else we owned. With its pink handle, it was a temptation. Its quality was obvious. It had been finely crafted by a skilled bladesmith and was exceptionally sharp. Ah. Of course. Ree looked thoughtful. If a darkling did this, the rose is compromised. Its magic turned dark and unpredictable. What? Catri asked. What is he saying? He says the rose is compromised because of the darkling. Its magic turned dark and unreliable. I glanced at Catri apologetically. When I told Morel about the darkling, she got angry. She told me to bury the rose. Catri grabbed my hand. But what about this? What about Maisie's hand? Ree's eyes narrowed. Let me see it. I sat down again and set my hand on the table in front of him. Ree walked around it, inspecting it from every angle. Nice. Very nice magical work. He paused to look up at me. Did you ask for this? For a new hand? No. Why would I ask for a beautiful hand? I was saving the magic for Catri. I didn't even ask to be healed. Wiggle your fingers, he said. But be careful. Watch out for me. I rolled my eyes and complied. Were you gloved when you picked the rose? He asked. No. I held it with my bare left hand as I cut it with the dagger in my right hand. With the dagger. He rubbed his chin again, as if that were significant. When you offered her the rose, Morel saw your new hand? No. My hand was gloved. Ree tapped his chin animatedly, clearly ratcheting up his thinking. Did the darkling touch the rose with his skin? He may have done, I said. Not with his heel. He was wearing boots. But at one point, he slapped it out of my hand. He may have done then. Ree took his time answering. Then we can't know for sure. But I think you got the good magic before the darkling touched the rose. Or the iron dagger may have poisoned the darkling's dark magic and prevented it from infecting the rose. Impossible to know. They're only theories. He turned to Catri with a sympathetic look she couldn't see. Explain the risks and my theories to her. Ask her how much chance she's willing to take in search of a cure. Make clear that at this point, using the rose is extremely dangerous. I explained to Catri gently. Ree just doesn't know how much, if at all, the darkling corrupted the rose. None of us do. It could cure you. Or kill you. Or do nothing. And anything in between. What do you think? Catri looked tortured. I think it has to be your choice, and yours alone. I'm so sorry it's come to this. I swallowed, my natural tendency to apologize for failing her. There was no need to burden her with my guilt. I didn't want anything to influence her decision. Catri's gaze fell to her lap and her own bony, heavily veined, age-spotted, arthritic hands. She twisted them in her lap. Finally, she looked up and took my healed hand again, clearly marveling at it. I squeezed her hand. What choice do I have? She said in a soft, still voice. The rose won't bloom again for another 20 to 30 years. By then I'll be long gone. At least this gives me a chance. I'll do anything. Anything. She released my hand and grabbed the table for support. Ree walked over and patted hers with his tiny hand, even though she couldn't see, feel, or hear him. I make no promises, Sorella. This could go very badly. Or very well. Or it may not work at all. He surprised me with his gentleness and sympathy. He'd never called her sister before either. It was a term of endearment, usually reserved only for me and only used rarely. In any case, he continued, we don't have much time. We must work quickly. Tell Catri to pick up the rose and rub it over her skin, but beware of the thorns. Then draw Catri a bath and boil water for tea. Are you actually helping us, Ree? I shouldn't have voiced my surprise aloud. I wouldn't call it helping. I'd call it self-preservation. I couldn't help smiling. It was like him to deflect. I blinked back tears. You've lived in the North too long. You've gone soft and become one of us. I handed Catri the rose and told her the plan, then turned to Ree. What does tea have to do with it? We're going to make tea from the rosehip. He pointed to it. It's ripening fast and will soon be rotten if we don't hurry. She'll have to drink the tea hot. With luck, the tea will heal her insides. Then we'll have her bathe in a hot bath of rose petals. We're trying to cover her entire body with the essence of the rose's magic.